How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from WeatherSponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to focus on Hurricane Tammy and see if this could potentially bring impacts to the United States in the more long-term future. We're also going to take a look at Tropical Depression 20, which is likely to develop into Tropical Storm Vince in the very near future and make landfall somewhere along the coast of Central America, bringing heavy rainfall. And we're going to also talk about the possibility of other tropical disturbances developing into a tropical storm, potentially right over the Caribbean islands. So taking a look at the current strength of Hurricane Tammy right now, its maximum sustained winds are at around 80 miles per hour with its central millibar pressure hovering around 993 millibars, and it's moving north at around 7 miles per hour, so it is moving a little bit slower right now as it's dealing with very weak steering currents, which is the reason why it's going to move very slowly to the north before potentially taking a northwest turn, which could maybe become a concern for the United States if it's able to maintain its strength. And that's a big if, because it seems like conditions will only get more hostile here on out for Hurricane Tammy. While for the short-term future it should strengthen, it could encounter very hostile conditions, which could make it difficult for it to maintain its strength, or at least maintain any sort of its tropical identity by the time it approaches the United States. And in terms of Tropical Depression 20, we do see a high 80% chance of this developing into a tropical storm, as we do see within the next 48 hours it should develop, so right up along the coast of Costa Rica and even extending a little bit further northward. You need to be prepared for very heavy rainfall as well as gusty winds, especially along the coast, but that should be the primary threat. It won't have a lot of time to intensify, but let me show you guys the computer models to get a better idea of the future of this storm system. So take a look at the latest run of the European model. Your big question probably is, will Hurricane Tammy impact the United States in any way, shape, or form? Because based on the latest projected path from the National Hurricane Center, it probably has some of you concerned that it's going to take a left hook and potentially make another landfall right over the United States. Well, at least for right now, the good news is that the computer models don't expect this storm system to live that long to really be much of any concern for the United States. We do see that the European model does want to strengthen this a little bit as it continues ahead further northward, but we do see the storm is going to be very lopsided. There's a strong amount of wind shear right over this storm system thanks to a trough that's moving through. That's bringing a strong southwesterly upper level flow that's going to bring a lot of the dry air to the west towards the western half of this storm and really prevent it from intensifying as it moves, or at least intensifying rapidly as it moves further northward. It should intensify a little bit as it moves further northward, maybe up to a higher end category 1 or category 2 hurricane. I wouldn't rule out that possibility, but it won't necessarily rapidly intensify under conditions like this. It'll mainly intensify due to baroclinic influences taking hold of this storm, creating just enough instability associated with the cold air from this dry air for this to at least maintain its strength. It's definitely losing its tropical characteristics further northward it moves, as a lot of its intensification should be from non-tropical processes at this point. But whether it's tropical or extratropical at this point, it'll still be a relatively strong storm hovering around like I said, a strong category 1 or low end category 2. And then if we were to continue to move forward, we do see the good news is that the European model eventually does expect this storm to strengthen due in part due to the stronger wind shear, as well as just the sheer amount of dry air that's just so west of this storm system. And this storm is expected to move further westward thanks to a ridge just to the north of it, and thankfully the European model fizzles it out before it comes anywhere close to being a threat towards the southeast coast, where the dry air just becomes too much for this to handle. Of course, there could be changes with forecasts. We're really going to need to see how much dry air there will be. I think the wind shear will be strong regardless, which is the reason why I find it difficult to believe it'll maintain its strength, or at least maintain any sort of at least wind speed that's close to tropical storm status by the time it approaches the United States, mainly due to the fact that there's just going to be a strong amount of wind shear. And while the wind shear, and let me show you guys a wind shear map right now to give you guys a better idea of what I'm talking about, because while early on the upper level flow should be moving in the same direction, which should at least help maintain the storm's wind speed strength, because although the wind shear is technically strong, it's at least moving the same direction as a storm system. So at least along the eastern half of this storm system, the winds will still be there for this to maintain hurricane status, whether it's an extratropical storm or not. But moving forward into the more long-term future, we see that this storm changes direction, which creates a much higher level of wind shear, because now we see wind direction change with height. While the upper level flow is coming from the south, we now have this storm system, or at least the winds along the lower levels are trying to move towards the west, which means that there's a strong wind change in wind direction with height, which represents that there's a strong amount of wind shear. We clearly see this wind direction is moving completely opposite directions, which will make it very hostile for it to maintain its strength. So at least for right now, I don't expect this to be much of a worry for the United States, and I think it'll be the most likely scenario that it'll pretty much at least dissipate or at least get deterred before it reaches the United States East Coast. So the GFS model, in my opinion, shows an even better forecast where it doesn't even want to steer the storm very close to the United States, unlike the European model. While we do see a stronger storm in the GFS model's case, as the GFS model does expect a lot more wind shear to help maintain this storm's intensity, it's going to be much further away from the United States coast for it to be much of a worry, as the GFS model doesn't expect the ridging just to the north of it to be as strong. If we were to take a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly, we clearly see that there's just enough of weakness in ridging to where this could be able to move further northward, as typically for a storm system to take a strong left hook, it's going to need a very strong ridge just to the north of it. It needs to be extremely strong, because while there is a decent amount of ridging just to the north of it, it isn't necessarily strong enough, especially during this month, in the month of October, where the westerly winds tend to be very strong. It would definitely need a very, very strong ridge to steer it to the west, which is unlikely historically speaking, and I think that's the most likely scenario. We will see this move out to sea, as the ridging just won't be strong enough and the GFS model agrees with that historical standard where the westerly winds are just too strong and steer it not even close to the United States. However, this could be a threat for Bermuda, so Bermuda, you need to be aware of this over the next few days. This could bring impacts to you guys as early as Friday, as potentially a hurricane, depending on how much dry air this will deal with, because taking a look at the dry air in the GFS model's case, while the GFS model also does expect a decent amount of dry air, it expects a lot more moisture for this storm system to encounter a lot more moisture to fend off this dry air, which is the reason why it's able to at least maintain its strength once it moves to the northeast. So however, at this point, it seems unlikely it's going to impact the United States East Coast, where Bermuda, you need to be aware of the potential of impacts, as the position of the ridging just to the north of it should be key in determining if you're going to see impacts. However, moving on to our next disturbance that is likely to develop into a tropical storm, which would be called Tropical Storm Vince, we do see the GFS model is expecting a high amount of convective activity to occur just off the Central American coast, where we see the millibar pressure drop down to 1,005 millibars. It's expected to be a weak tropical storm at landfall. Most likely, it's barely going to have enough time over water to really strengthen much more than a weak tropical storm. I could say that with certainty, but the main threat throughout Central America should be the heavy rainfall, so you need to be prepared for the possibility of flash flooding. And if you live in the more vulnerable areas of Central America, definitely make sure to take the right precautions. Remember, if you see a body of water, turn around, don't drown, because typically the body of water is a lot deeper than what you'd expect. So make sure to take the right precautions if you live in flood prone areas all over Central America, since Tropical Storm Vince will likely bring a heavy amount of rain in excess of 5 to 10 inches of rain. And something I think we need to take a look at for the more long-term future by next week is the possibility of a new tropical storm developing right around the Caribbean islands, because we see on the tail end of Hurricane Tammy, we do see there's quite a bit of convective activity occurring, and this convective activity could easily spawn a new area of tropical activity, and we could potentially see a low pressure system develop out of this influx of moisture we're seeing, as a lot of this moisture should come from the main development region and move further northward, as well as the northern portions of Central, or at least South America. And we do see that the GFS model does develop a low pressure system on October 29th on Sunday, just north of Puerto Rico. So it's definitely at least something to be aware of. And we see another low pressure system develop just to the north of the Dominican Republic. So of course there's still a high amount of uncertainty with this. A big thing that could prevent this tropical storm from developing is the fact that there's so much moisture surrounding it, so many different areas of convective activity, so it's going to be very hard to converge all that energy towards one area for the convective activity and the wind speed to be strong enough, or at least the rotation to be strong enough in any one of these areas of convective activity. So it's going to be, there might be a little bit too much competition when it comes to a limited amount of energy for this to strengthen. And of course, the big thing is that the wind shear should be very strong. It's pretty usual during this time of the year when, of course, we see the cooler temperatures continue to move further southward and create a higher amount of instability and just enhance the wind speed overall for the wind shear to be quite strong, as we do see the wind shear is a little bit strong in this area. However, there is this small area where the wind shear is relatively light. So if this area of convective activity is able to somehow develop under this small upper level high, then we could see our next tropical storm after Tropical Storm Vince, which likely will develop just off of Central America. So the Caribbean, you need to pay attention to the early part of next week for tropical storm development. I definitely wouldn't rule it out with a lighter amount of wind shear as well as a high amount of convective activity. And I wouldn't be surprised if the National Hurricane Center outlines the Caribbean islands as being involved with potentially the next tropical storm. So definitely stay tuned for more updates, as I'll certainly keep you guys updated. So here's a look at the model intensity guidance for Hurricane Tammy. It's expected to strengthen a bit before it eventually weakens thanks to the abundant amount of dry air. It could potentially maintain hurricane status a little bit longer than expected if the GFS model scenario was correct, where we do see a little bit more moisture. But for the most part, it should remain around category 1 to strong tropical storm status. And taking a look at the ensemble members provided from the GFS model, it is a little bit more concerning because we do have a decent amount of ensemble members wanting to take this further westward. Some even taking landfall over Florida at around tropical storm status, and Cuba and the Bahamas could maybe get involved in some of these ensemble members. However, I'll still say at least the majority of them still want to take it just well to the east of the Bahamas, Cuba, and of course the United States. However, we do have a decent amount of ensemble members wanting to take this storm system over Bermuda. So it's still too early to say if Bermuda will experience direct impacts, but Bermuda, you definitely need to keep a closer eye on this one. And really what will determine if this storm system moves further westward is how strong the ridging will be. And we're also going to need to see if it'll be able to maintain the strength once it potentially does move further westward. So I'll definitely keep you guys updated over the next several days once we get more certainty. So this is National Hurricane Center's projected path, which does have some people along the East Coast to be concerned. However, I'll say that it's way too early to be concerned right up along the United States. You definitely want to keep an eye on this because you could potentially see a tropical storm up along the coast if this forecast continues from the National Hurricane Center, but it'll likely be a very weak storm if it were to take a track further westward, and might not even be a tropical storm at all. It might just dissipate. That's still certainly a possibility, but definitely stay tuned for more updates. It's still a bit uncertain. I wish I could give you guys an answer as of right now, but computer models aren't that reliable just yet. So I'll definitely keep you guys updated and tell you when you could be certain with the forecast. And here's the amount of rainfall you should expect as Tropical Storm Vince makes landfall somewhere up along Central America. We do see that you could expect anywhere from 5 to 10 inches of rain, especially in the higher elevations of Central America. We see the coast of Costa Rica would experience close to 10 inches of rain, as well as the coast of Nicaragua could experience a heavy amount of rainfall. So you definitely need to be prepared for potentially major impacts all throughout Central America when it comes to flooding. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more weather-related content.